Okay, let's see. My goal here is to... Oh, fuck. Panagia here. I'm gonna... This whole thing started as an argument for guaranteed basic income. The intentions were mostly political and ethical and economics and stuff like that. But I started looking into all kinds of other stuff while looking into this. My whole idea was that if you don't change the incentive structure of the current system, even if let's say criminal activities or immoral acts or stuff like that, even if you somehow set a precedent that certain acts are not allowed to go on, still, let's say all people who do horrendous stuff, wars, smuggling of whatever, guns, smuggling of guns and stuff like that, even if you punish all those people, the incentive structure remains the same. So other people who will take their place will have the exact same characteristics. You probably slow down for a bit the process of terrible activity. I don't want to say criminal activity, because the people who commit those criminal activities are also the people who write the laws. So I will instead say immoral activities, although you can judge them by their own laws. They're mostly illegal based on their own laws. Who is they? Anyway, I'm gonna go into all that stuff. Who is they? What are the incentives? Anyway, my idea was that guaranteed basic income would be a thing that would change the incentive structure at least at a certain level. It removes the economic coercion from the equation. So it creates a minimum. Most of the... Okay, let's start. I'll explain first why this whole investigation went on the way it went. So the idea is that there are certain things that through corruption you can get all kinds of people to do all kinds of things, okay? By offering them money or whatever one might want. So you can get people to do horrible stuff through corruption, but through coercion, there are stuff which certain people will not do no matter what you offer them, okay? You can imagine stuff that you wouldn't do no matter what even if they offered you the entire world. There are stuff, there's actions that you would never take. However, through coercion, there are all kinds of extreme stuff that people do indeed and would do. I know that through coercion, if your children are starving and you cannot feed your children, there is all kinds of extremely nasty stuff that you might be willing to do in order to feed your children, that kind of thing. So there are certain things, coercion is more important than corruption. There are two sides of the same coin. It's like the stick and the carrot. But there are certain things that you cannot get people to do through the carrot. So you always also need the stick. Guaranteed basic income pretty much get rid of the stick. the carrot is still there, but yeah, it gets rid of the stick. So that was the idea. Now, when I started investigating this idea, there was no talk about social credit score and stuff like that. Nobody was talking about. Very few people. I mean, it's been years since I have been looking into this, and nobody was talking about social credit score back then. But still, I didn't use the word UBI because I knew that UBI can be bullshitized, and that's why Martin Luther King wasn't using the word UBI. I don't know. He was using guaranteed instead. He wasn't using universal. I don't know when they changed it and they started calling it universal basic income instead of guaranteed basic income, but definitely whoever changed it he wanted to get rid of the guaranteed part. The guaranteed part means that it cannot be bullshitized. It's guaranteed, it has immunity. You cannot have strains attached. You cannot have social credit scores attached. And I didn't know about social credit score back then, but I was like, okay, what if there's inflation? And your guaranteed basic income cannot buy you anything. So what happens to people who are in prison, for example? What happens to people who have political, ideological disagreements with the dominant ideology? What happens to these people? So I was like, okay, if it's not guaranteed, there can be all kinds of coercion on top of the basic income. Still, even with a guaranteed basic income, even with a UBI that comes with all strains attached, all kinds of, coercion about what you can say, what you cannot say, how you spend your money, and stuff like that, and what you do with your life, all kinds of coercive authoritarian measures. Even that, they haven't implemented yet, and I think the reason they haven't implemented it yet is pretty obvious. The power of economic coercion is too much to be substituted with political coercion of the kind of the coercion that the social credit score would use. So the idea that people, there would be limitations on people through social credit score, but they still will have money to take care of themselves and take care of their loved ones, and not have to deal with the extreme stress of having to deal with an emergency and not having the money to deal with an emergency, or the extreme stress that comes with having a loved one who suffers from some disease and you don't have money to take care of them, and you have to work like 3 jobs in order to pay your medical bills, stuff like that. They are not willing to get rid of that kind of coercion. They are not willing. I suspect, I'm 90% certain that that's the reason they haven't implemented UBI yet, because its cost is pretty much irrelevant. It's very compared, if you look at the numbers, if you look at how much money the 0.1% is making, and how much looting is going on through taxes, through fees, through all kinds of stuff. Like the money, and also I have to get into economical stuff, that money circulates in the domestic economy, so it doesn't create inflation. It will go to your dentist, it will go to your doctor, it will go to the local place where they sell food. It circulates within the economy, so it's not inflationary money. I can go into inflation and myths about inflation, that whole thing that everybody, including people I respect, say that inflation is the inflation of a monetary supply. That's all BS. It's not true. It's a factor, but it's not the primary factor. The primary factor of inflation is monopolies, and we can see that by studying history. If it wasn't for monopolies, we would have extreme deflationary pressures, not inflationary pressures. The stuff that we are buying would be dirt cheap, because Keynes, I have to say 1 million things. Keynes predicted by the year 2000 that we will be working 4 hours a day, and we would be our biggest problem would be boredom. Why was Keynes wrong? And Keynes was not was not a man of the people. He was a eugenicist. He was not he was not some revolutionary or something. Because he was looking at the increase of productivity of labor. And he's like, okay, if the productivity of labor is increasing at these rates, people will be producing massive amounts of stuff with very little labor, so they won't have to work as much. He was wrong. He was wrong because, because that's not how power works. It has nothing to do with productivity. It has to do with power and monopolies and stuff like that. So all that extra labor went to very specific hands. If you want to see what hands, who is they, all you have to do is look at Piketty's work, who shows how money consolidates and how the rate at which increasingly more and more money is concentrated in fewer and fewer hands, which is something we know already for thousands of years. It's the Matthew law. It's common sense. Those who have resources have the resources to gain more resources. And there are other things I can explain about how this works. Power is strictly relative. So the more, okay, let's say we're 10 people. In order for one of those 10 people to have more status than the other 9 have to have lesser status. It's status and power is strictly relative. So in order for certain people to have, and that's why inflation, people understand inflation in a wrong way. In order for someone to have power over the other 9, they have to have less power. That's why anyway, I can go into inflation later, but anyway, I'm just wanted to say that we have many studies. We know, for example, when the minimum wage is increased on a country with inflation, you increase the minimum wage to an equal rate of the increase of inflation, exactly for the reason I just explained, the way power works. Inflation drops. And that's not the same as guaranteed basic income. Guaranteed basic income is given to everybody, so it's a better way to fight inflation. Whereas by increasing the minimum wage, there are all kinds of wages that are not increased. But still, by increasing the wages equally to inflation to a significant amount of the population, there is no interest for the oligarchs, for the monopolies to keep increasing the price of their goods, because inflation starts hitting them as much as it hits the rest of the population. Anyway, inflation first appeared after the first big trusts and monopolies appeared by the robber barons in the US. And then the rest of the world followed, obviously. The grapes of wrath is a classic example, destruction of supply. Generally, you destroy the traditional rules of the economy, you completely organize the price of a good based on the demand, strictly based on the demand. You completely ignore the supply side. That's why Keynes was wrong. I mean, he wasn't wrong. Actually, the increase of the productivity of labor until the year 2000 was much bigger than the projections Keynes had. He was wrong because he didn't account for the scumbags who we call the elites. And the system, that's why you need a guaranteed basic income, or something like that. You need some change in the incentive structure, because the system selects for dark trades. It selects for those trades. So it's not just throwing those people in jail and trying them for their crimes, or whatever, a revolution that kills them. This doesn't solve the long-term problem, the serious problem. There are two kinds of problems, and anyway, that was the goal, but I ended up in trying to understand what is to be done. I ended up studying all kinds of other things, like the way the way the world works in general, order and chaos, efficiency, resilience, stuff like that. And I think I should say a bunch of stuff about this. Yeah. I don't know, maybe I'll end it here. here. I was in a bad mood here. Anyway, I explain why guaranteed basic income changes incentives. How on the one hand we despise traders and Wall Street, the 1%, or the upper echelons, not the 1%. I mean, traders are not the billionaires, but they're up there. And how at the same time we envy them. We hate them and envy them at the same time, and this is part of how the system works. And if the incentives don't change, then the way status works, I explain sexual selection here, how sexual selection selects for status and power, and if you don't change the incentive structures of the economy, status and power will be defined, will be people like, I don't know, Elon Musk and other sociopaths like that, Bill Gates, the Clintons, psychopaths and sociopaths. This is what the system selects for. These are the kind of people who are willing to do immoral stuff in order to get further and further in their career. I'm not saying this is the only characteristic, but it's a necessary characteristic, and it's a characteristic that dark triad traits are a characteristic that is in common throughout all elites in the current system. How do we know that? A very easy way to know that is by looking at sexual selection. Sexual selection is extremely attracted to dark triad traits, and the way sexual selection works, I'll give you this example here. If you look at the way women that choose men in Tinder, they will always choose for the most good-looking man on Tinder. They don't do that on any other environment. They only choose for the most good-looking man in Tinder, because in Tinder the criteria is the only thing they choose by, the thing that men compete for in Tinder is looks. That's all you can go with in Tinder. In different environments, women don't choose for looks. So it's always the context that dictates what women are attracted to, and they always choose in different contexts the best in that context. Now, so in all over society, it will be things like intelligence. More extremely important is social talent. How good you are at socializing and stuff like that. But in a civilization, a societal level, in a holistic level, the one thing that the people who are the most successful have, and this is something that women understand implicitly. They understand it not through the lens of their frontal cortex. It's their limbic system, their primitive brain, their lizard brain, which catches on these patterns. The lizard brain is generally much stronger than the frontal cortex. The frontal cortex is, the last development of our brain, and it's rationalizing and stuff like that. It often comes up with excuses and rationalization. I'm not saying that the frontal cortex is not important or anything. It's very important, but it's terrible at understanding what drives you. Okay, it gives all kinds of stories. For example, what drives me to upload this video? Is it that I genuinely want to do good for the world? Is it some narcissistic element? What is it? I can tell you what I believe it is, but is it that the true reason? I don't know. Nobody does. We come up with stories, try to figure out why we do the things we do, and that's what the frontal cortex does. So you try to pay attention to that, what the limbic system does, what the entire body actually does, not just the limbic system. So women are actually attracted to power, and the way power is dictated, the characteristic patterns that implicitly they understand when they're looking at their TV or at YouTube videos. They see that the common characteristics that all successful people have are dark triad traits. Okay, that's why they're attracted to those dark triad traits. And I can explain that both in economic terms and why this happens in political economy. I can even explain that in religious terms. I was an atheist when I started writing this, and I mean, am I anything other now? I don't know. Anyway, I don't call myself an atheist anymore, but I can explain this in a more moral terms why the system does, and I will explain this in moral terms why the system selects for dark triad traits. It selects for evil. It selects for radical evil. And this is not new. This is true on all societies. This is, Plato was fighting against the sophists. In communist Russia, we had, the elites of the Communist Party and the commissars and all these people. In Rome, we had the cardinals. You can read the polemics of Luther against the Catholic Church. It's the same in all systems. It has to do with virtue signaling. It has to do with using the letter of the law against the spirit of the law, using the letter of the law for personal gain. Now we've done this. This is idolatry, pretty much. This is why the Tao that is written is not the eternal Tao. That's how the Tao starts. This is why you should not use God's name in vain. The idea is, the spirit of these laws is that you shouldn't. The map is not the territory, as they say. Using your belief as a means to accumulate power, or using your belief because that belief serves your utilitarian needs or wants, that's idolatry. And pretty much all religious systems are against idolatry. In Islam, there's this female Sufi which said, God, if I worship you in hope of heaven, exclude me from heaven. If I worship you in fear of hell, send me in hell. She was talking about this. I believe that's the core of radical evil. Radical evil is utilitarianism. And by the way, we've made idolatry and utilitarianism, and we've made that our official religion. So, whereas in different systems, idolatry would happen. The Pharisees would be idolatrous, but they would try to hide it. They would try to pretend that they were pious, but they were pious only in form. In truth, they were manipulating Judaic law for personal gains. They were hypocrites. Same applies for, Catholic Church, the cardinals. They were pious in form. They were horrible in essence. And but they would do this. They would hide this. Okay, they would inform, at least. They would say that they are pious, pretend that they are pious. Today, with utilitarianism, we are not even hiding it. We are heathens openly. Because that's what utilitarianism is. There is no spirit of the law. There's just the letter of the law. There's no end. There's just means. Means justify the means. And this is how transhumanism connects as well. The idea that there is no end. There's nothing beyond the means. There is nothing beyond computation. There's nothing beyond the narrow human understanding. So we're gods, pretty much. And yeah, it connects to idolatry pretty much. And hubris is also the same thing. You think that your understanding of the world, whatever understanding that might be, you might be looking at the world through the lens of, I don't know, atheism or whatever, Christian thought or Judaic thought or whatever. If you think that your mapping of the world is the world and you fully capture reality, you know pretty much everything. Which I give you an example to understand what exactly I'm saying. You know, Robert Sapolsky, on his arguments against the existence of will, he was saying that, you know, we've figured pretty much everything out. Bernard Russell had said something similar. We figured everything out, and it's just a matter of computation. It's just to, you know, a little bit of more number crunching, getting better machines, understanding the atom a little bit better. But we figured everything out. That's the thing. So you think that your version of reality, your understanding of reality, completely captures reality. That's official doctrine pretty much. That's the dominant ideology under which I grew up, and pretty much the entire world grew up under that ideology, which is false, by the way. I don't know what's beyond computation. By definition, I cannot know what's beyond computation, but by definition also, we know that computation has limits. A classic example would be Gödel's incompleteness theorem. He proved that there will always be true statements or axioms, true statements in math that you cannot prove always. We have similar problems in physics, we have similar problems in formal logic. So, I don't know what's beyond logic, I don't know what's beyond the map. I cannot tell you what the territory is like. Maybe I can speculate on that, and I do speculate a lot on what the territory is like. Why did I end up doing this? Again, I ended up doing this, studying all this stuff initially completely for political and economic reasons. But when I try to understand how the Pharisees work, how the elites work, I had to understand this. Okay, what's the ideology? What's the mental process? And that's how I stumbled into all this stuff as an atheist. What the fuck? But yeah, that's how it works. It's all bullshit, pretty much. It's all bullshit. And that's radical evil. I cannot prove that. I suspect it is. I suspect that everything starts from idolatry. Everything starts from your beliefs being shaped in such a way to suit your needs and wants. That hypocrisy where you believe things that are convenient to you. So there is no territory, there is no truth. Truth is subjective. It's just what fits you and suits you. Now, I'll give examples on that. The best example is Plato's cave. Plato's myth of the cave. I will not read them. I will not explain. I will simply explain the core of the myth. I don't want to go through the entire thing. You can, on YouTube, there are audiobooks that you can easily find. Very public, and find the myth. People who explain the myth, they never give Plato's explanation. I've found nobody giving Plato's explanation of the myth. Plato, after he goes on with the myth, that's why you should always, if you can, search for original sources. Even Vervaeke, which I respect, he didn't spend the time to say what Plato himself meant by his myth. He goes into the matrix and the one and all that kind of bullshit, which is cool. You can have your own interpretations, but spend time saying what Plato himself meant. I think, yeah, you should probably do that. Anyway, the myth is like this. We're all stuck in a cave. We're only looking at a wall and a cave, and shadows appear there. And those shadows are not reality. What we believe that the shadows that appear on the wall of the cave, we believe that's reality. And there's this one prisoner which manages to escape. He gets outside of the cave. He sees the real world, and he comes back to explain to the other prisoners that those shadows in the wall of the cave, they're not reality, and pretty much they kill him. He tries to free them from the cave, and they kill him. This is typical. I mean, Plato was not just talking about Socrates, his teacher, who was killed by the Athenian people. He was also prophetic there, because that's a very common theme in history. Very common theme. Anyway, so Plato's explanation on the myth is that the people who control what appear in the wall of the cave, in the myth he says that they're people who move idols in front of a fire, and the fire casts the shadow on the wall, and that's how the prisoners see these shadows who they think it's reality. Anyway, the people who control what appears on the wall, the people who control what appears in your YouTube feed, in your Facebook feed, in your TV, and newspapers, and on and on, the people who control that feed, Plato's explanation is the people who want power and the people who have power. So it's the elites and the sophists. We know that by the people who want power and have power, we know that Plato hated the sophists, and he thought that the sophists were a unique feature of democracy only, and the decadence of democracy. So Plato actually hated democracy. He blamed democracy for the murder, for the death of Socrates, of his teacher, which was inaccurate. And you can see in the rest of the Republic, in the beginning of the Republic, you have the myth of the cave and his explanation, and I agree with Plato's explanation. I find most of the rest of the explanations in YouTube pretty irrelevant anyway, a lot of BS there. But I agree with Plato's explanation, but I don't agree that that's a unique feature of democracy. It's the same, it's the way power works. And he says that, by the way, it's the people who want power and the people who have power. It's a feature of power. A very good analogy is also The Lord of the Rings, where power works through corruption and coercion, the stick and the carrot. So I agree with that. I don't agree with the idea that it was uniquely a problem of democracy, and I think that the system, I mean, Chris Hedges was accusing Plato of being a fascist. Because the system he proposes to solve this problem is a corporate state, pretty much, in which the philosophers are the philosopher kings, and they arrange secret marriages and all kinds of other creepy stuff. But yeah, I believe generally the Republic is pretty boring. The most important stuff is the myth of the cave. The rest has interest, have some insight of how Athenian society thought at the time. And by the way, the rest of the Republic, in which he built his own corporate state, is the reason why oligarchies always loved Plato. The Catholic Church loved Plato. All kinds of oligarchies or aristocracies loved Plato because they saw themselves as the cardinals in Rome saw themselves as the philosopher kings, right? So Plato ultimately builds this ideal society, which is for the most part bullshit. You can give him, I wouldn't call him a fascist, for example. And I think, anyway, it's not that simple. It's not the current thing that I want to go into. I think there's something about the power needed to be incorporated by people who are driven by philosophy and not by people who are driven from power. The idea that, Gandalf should not take the ring, Aragorn should not take the ring, Galadriel should not take the ring. It has to be someone like Frodo who carries the ring of power. If someone powerful carries the ring of power, you're fucked pretty much. So I think there's something to that, the idea that it has to be philosophers who are the king, because philosopher in Greek means the lover of wisdom. So someone who doesn't love power. I think power and wisdom are opposite. And again, I can explain the philosophical part and the moral part of this. So yeah, and this explains also there are so many things. Yeah, there are so many details. Explain my thesis on detail and why I base my thesis on primary, the hierarchy of ideas, the primary factors that affect certain things. I don't care about secondary factors because I don't have the capacity to fully calculate, but there are things that are obvious that, for example, poverty is obviously a primary factor of coercion, the threat of poverty. Yeah. If you want to explain crime without poverty, you're pretty much an imbecile. So, let's see. But there are two parts. I should start explaining the nature of the absolute. Yeah, my theory of everything. That sounds extremely pretentious. Anyway, so the way order and chaos works, and it's very much affected. At the time that I was reading this, I wasn't familiar with Ian McGilchrist. Later, I found out of his work, The Master and Disease Emissary, and it recalibrated some of the things that I thought. Pretty much my theory is that the contradictory nature of the absolute is the absolute, and I just contradicted myself. How is this relevant? This is relevant because of the way power works. And McGilchrist also says this, that, the left hemisphere of our brain is interested in power, whereas the right hemisphere is interested in understanding, something like this. And he says that this dipole is not equal. The right hemisphere, the one that's trying to understand the world, should be superior to the one that is interested in power. If you have power as the superior part, you're screwed pretty much. And he gives scientific evidence for this. He takes examples of people who had a right hemisphere stroke and a left hemisphere stroke, and he compares the two. So he gives scientific evidence why you wouldn't want to have a right hemisphere stroke. Okay, it's amazing work, probably the most important scientist in the century, because he addresses the odd issue, which science never deals with, the odd issue. Science only tells what is. So McGilchrist is more than just a scientist. Anyway, initially my theory was that order and chaos is equal. So let me explain what I mean by order and chaos. The contradictory nature of the absolute is the absolute. I just contradict myself. So in order to map the absolute, I take the example of all with good measure. Where is it? And I saw how all with good measure breaks apart, contradicts itself at 3 points. So, and I suspect that constant recalibration, constant measurement is the way the world fits itself. So when you look at the heavens, you don't just see a primordial mess. You don't see there's structure, there's patterns when you look at the night sky. Okay, there is a logic behind this, and I suspect that this conflict between order and chaos is the precondition in order to have structure, in order to not just be a completely random universe or a universe that it's just a manifestation of will. It's like a mess of the two, a fight of the two. And I mostly see order as the manifestation of the will, and this is important as a map of understanding the world. I will mostly be talking about this, how I map the world. And chaos as pretty much resilience. So it's like order would be discipline, efficiency, what's the thing? Efficiency, specificity, the one. Order is the one. Whereas chaos is the many. Now, some of these analogies might be equivocations. I have been testing whether they are equivocation or not. So far, they seem to line up. But again, it needs, I'm not that smart. Smarter people than me have to look into this. Pretty much efficiency is on the one side, and will and constraints and, you know, discipline. And on the other side we have resilience, diversity, you know, multiple opportunities, the many. And there is a clear, in general, in nature, this is obvious, it's common sense. In nature in general, there is a trade-off between specificity and flexibility. Okay, this is common sense. Let's say you're a trader. If you diversify your portfolio, you have more flexibility and more resilience. If you don't diversify your portfolio and bet all your money on the one stock that you think that it's gonna go great, or maybe you have inside information or whatever, you get maximum efficiency. So there's a trade-off. How much are you gonna bet on the one thing that's gonna skyrocket in price, and how much are you gonna be safe and pull your eggs in multiple baskets? That's the idea between order and chaos in general. And up until I looked into McGilchrist, I was certain that order and chaos are equal. Yin-yang, that yin is equal to yang. And after my Gilchrist work, I'm pretty certain that chaos is primary to order. Resilience is more important than order. You cannot have one without the other. You need both. So viewing strictly through the lens of resilience will lead to horrors. But resilience is primary to efficiency. Okay, this is my idea. I'm not 100% sure of this, but I think if I read McGilchrist's work correctly, that's probably the conclusion you get from his work. So chaos is primary. Anyway, let's map the absolute through all with good measure. It's an absolute statement, and I suspect that the universe in all levels of existence, from non-living things to living things, to your cells on your body, to your mind, to your organs, in all levels of existence, there is this constant recalibration, this fittedness, as Vervaeke says it. Everything tries to find its fitting place, and also Michael Levin makes similar arguments. There's this constant need to try to calibrate the space around you. This constant love and hate relationship between the one and the many, the individual and the environment, or the individual and the troop. This love and hate relationship, and this seems to appear in all levels of existence. This is what I suspect. Speculation. But let's go to formal logic, because what I'm gonna say now, it has no speculation, it's formal logic, strictly. So, if you do everything with good measure, you lose the sense of measure, obviously, because you are applying measure without measure. This is how the system fails in the side of order. You're applying measure without measure. Okay, since applying measure without measure is a contradiction, it's based on formal logic, it's wrong, so you apply no measure, right? Fuck measure. Let's play Hero of Might and Magic 15 hours a day. That's what I did when I figured out that measure is a fraud. Well, it breaks down as well there strictly through formal logic. If you apply no measure at all, your application of no measure becomes your measure. So you apply measure by applying no measure. That's your measure. Well, these are the two obvious ways the thing collapses. It collapses in order, it collapses in chaos. It also collapses in a third spot, which is more tricky, but it's also through formal logic it collapses. So let's say you apply measure, you realize that you are applying measure without measure, and we do this, by the way. Life does this, existence does this. We constantly recalibrate between resilience and efficiency. Constantly we do this instinctively. We don't do it consciously, and I suspect existence in general does this. Okay, anyway, informal logic, back to formal logic. So in the middle ground, since you are applying too much measure, you apply measure to the measure. Okay, but then you're applying too much measure to the measure, and then you have to apply measure to the measure of the measure, and then you have to apply measure to the measure of the measure of the measure, and this process goes to infinity. It's similar to the homuncular fallacy. Constantly you have to apply measure in a deeper level, and by doing this process to infinity, you obviously do this process without measure. And again, existence has to struggle with this. I think this is where the flaw which allows existence to exist is. This whole construct, like the flaw in formal logic is what allow for an existence that is not purely deterministic and fatalistic to exist. I suspect. Anyway, so the first two ways that collapse occurs, or contradiction occurs, one is contradiction occurs in the side of order, the one is on the side of chaos, and the middle ground, I don't know what to call it, I don't know, complexity, and that's probably very important. Again, smarter people than me have to look into it, because I suspect that the whole Kafkaesque state, self-serving bureaucracy, self-serving economy that doesn't serve the real economy but serves an artificial structure, all that stuff probably has to do with collapse on the middle ground. I disagree with Smachtenberger, who says that that we have a bias towards order. I mean, it's tricky because you get into all kinds of contradictions. I agree, but I disagree. It's like we have everything reverse. It's not exactly that we have too much order and too much discipline. We have discipline where we require resilience, and we have chaos where we require efficiency. We have everything reversed. So if, for example, when it comes to elites, you see extreme manifestation of will, extreme power. I don't mean just power in terms of, you look at Zuckerberg's life. Zuckerberg speaks Mandarin, and he does 600 push-ups, and he does decathlon with his friends and stuff like that. It's like you're dealing with a superhuman pretty much. And again, I always look at the environment, the chaos as primary. The environmental restriction as primary. I don't discard the individual, not at all. I just consider that the environment is primary. The environmental constraints. So you have manifestation of will and discipline and power at the top, and definitely that whole thing affects the dominant ideology, which the dominant ideology is an ideology which is not just an ideology that the elites hold, it's an ideology that pretty much the entire society holds, maybe with small differences in the way the middle class views this ideology, in the way that the plebs view this ideology, but we all hold this ideology pretty much with small differences. Hegemony, as Gramsci called it. Dominant ideology. So the dominant ideology, I would agree with Machtenberger that it's one which is extremely individualistic. It focuses on efficiency. It focuses on the one. It ignores the many. So I agree there. But at the same time, as this will manifests on the top, there is a zero-num dynamic with the will that manifests on the top and the will that you don't see on the bottom. So the more agency Zuckerberg anyway, so the more will you see on the top, the less will you see at the bottom, pretty much. There are zero sum. There are ways where will externalizes to damage. I mean, you could say that some of the manifestation of will at the top just externalizes its damage to the environment, but for the most part, I mean, when it comes to status, for example, when it comes to will that is related to status, it's strictly zero sum. Okay, status is strictly relative. So in order for someone to have more status, somebody else has to have less status. So when you see an extreme manifestation of status and power at the top, power within the society specifically, it means that that amount of power is missing from others within the society. And I'm not making an argument against it. I'm not discarding the existence of status altogether, that there shouldn't be leaders and stuff like that. But when we're dealing with that extreme imbalance, you have a problem. I mean, again, Piketty's work would help there if anybody wants to understand what I'm talking about. Extreme manifestation of will at the top. So, at the bottom, I disagree with Schmachtenberger. At the bottom, we do indeed need efficiency and discipline. It sounds discipline in service of what? It's never about the what. It's always about the how. So discipline in service of the people at the bottom. Okay, I'm not telling about discipline. Have a social credit score and suddenly you have a disciplined population in service of the elites. No, that will make us even more craven, even more. It will reduce our will even more, and will increase the agency and the will of the elites even more. So when I'm talking about discipline, I'm not talking about discipline in the service of someone else. I'm talking about not being craven, not being castrated. Where were we? What else should I explain? Fuck, I should have had a schema, cause yeah, the circular idea of existence instead of a linear growth idea. Linear growth again matches to hubris. This idea that we figured everything out when we're just getting better and better at being the best thing that ever was, matches with utilitarianism, transhumanism, and the rest. The idea that AI is smarter than you and you should treat AI like a god. All that stuff. It's all bullshit, by the way. We don't know shit. Yeah, I comment on all kinds of things. These are old stuff I've written. Bitching about UBA. Digitization of everything. Yeah, this is the idea I was touching on. So it's not... It's like everything we do is done 180 degrees opposite to the way that it should be done. And I had created a little video talking about the bullshitization of everything. Pretty much what we do is that we follow the letter of the law at the expense of the spirit of the law. That's what we do in all levels. And that's how bullseye everything. And we're not even aware that this is happening, because the whole this is water thing, we live in this environment, we're not aware of the water we're swimming in. Yeah, I should probably talk about the Garden of Eden. Fuck. Oh, it's not a 30. Yeah. God, if I worship you in fear of hell, burn me in hell. And if I worship you in hope of paradise, exclude me for paradise. This is the best case against idolatry, by far. The best I've seen, at least. Oh, that's her name. I don't know how to pronounce it. Rabia Basri. Hubris projection. Yeah, that's the way hubris manifests on the masses. Oh, I should explain so much stuff. Okay. So why do my class, the upper middle class, why does my class always side with the elites? And why is it that in most revolutions, there are not many revolutions. Revolutions are rare, but if you look at the French Revolution and the Communist Revolution, the Bolshevik Revolution, you'll see that it wasn't just the Tsar that lost his head. It was also a significant part of the bureaucracy which lost his head. And all kinds of upper middle class people were pretty much slaughtered. Educated people were often were killed. Why is that? Why did the plebs, the unwashed masses, hate us so much? This is a question that I had ever since I was a child, right? Common sense. Because you obviously are biased. You're like, we are the best class, we are not the elites, we're educated, blah blah blah. Internal bias. Obviously you want to believe that your class is the best. Well, the reason is pretty simple, and the reason we never side with, at least the majority of us, maybe some intellectual leaders might side with the plebs, or we very often, virtue signaling, we say we are leftists. Most of the upper middle class call themselves leftist, but it's only in form. In essence, they couldn't be further from the truth. We despise the working class. We find them, politically incorrect, and what is called vulgar, dumb, the classic stereotypes. We hate the lower classes and the working class. We consider they are stupid, all that kind of stuff. You can see that in the whole woke thing and the Pharisees, and it's a common theme that always works. The upper middle classes, the polite society despises the lower classes, always. And even though we might in name be pro-worker or whatever. Why is it that we side with the elites? We pay a price, by the way, to side with the elites, a financial price, we lower our actual power. Because if you actually see the amount of wealth that is concentrated in a few hands, and I suspect that was always true, it's just that this is extreme at the moment. I suspect that if you put the numbers down and number crunch, you'll see that always my class supports the elite at personal economic loss and loss of agency. But why do we do it? We do it because it's advantageous to be the one-eyed in the land of the blind. That is why, as I said, status is strictly relative. So if I am to live in a land of the two-eyed people and just be one-eyed people, one two-eyed guy among other two-eyed guys, if I'm just another dude, I'm just another dude, I'm irrelevant, I'm just another dude. If I'm the one-eyed in the land of the blind, well, the one-eyed in the land of the blind is king. That's pretty much, we see, we treat doctors and lawyers and accountants and upper classes, we treat them with respect, blah blah blah. So in order to get that respect, you pay a price to the elites, and the elites make sure that the lower classes will have to deal with high levels of coercion. The higher the level of coercion, none of this happens consciously. But in practice, the higher the level of coercion the lower classes have to deal with, the better, the more agency, the more status I have as a doctor or as a lawyer or as a whatever upper middle class guy you might be. The better it is for me. The more respected I will be, the more access I will have. Because again, status is relative, and most importantly, I will have access to better reproductive success. That's what the limbic system understands, right? So this happens unconsciously. That is why the elites, it's obvious why they are hubristic. In the plebs, it's tricky. I don't really understand why the plebs accept and incorporate the ideology of the elites. It's much trickier. I call it hubris projection, also known as slave mentality. I don't know why the average Englishman was proud of the Queen of England having all kinds of colonies around the world. I know that it's strictly not in his interest. As Parenti used to say, the empire feeds on the republic, or as somebody else would say, chickens come back home to roost. And again, power and status are strictly relative. So the more power the queen concentrates, the more status the queen concentrates, the more status is reduced for other people within the society. Simply to explain this as simple as possible, the more agency somebody has within the society, within social networking, the less agency other people have. Okay? It's zero sum. It adds up. I'm not saying that everybody should have absolutely equal agency or anything like that. I'm just saying that if you have massive concentrations of power and therefore massive concentrations of agency, that will manifest on all other people within that same society losing agency. And many have speculated that this is how ancient Athens was bullshitized and collapsed. Definitely ancient Rome collapsed like this. There's no doubt about that. For Athens, there are multiple speculations about why democracy degraded and became, the thing it became. So yeah, classic example, great example to explain this. There was this, this is a funny example. There is this plutocrat, old plutocrat, Greek plutocrat. He said this 30 years ago. He said that me and my worker, we both vote for the same party. Me and my worker, we both vote. He had factories and stuff. We both vote for the same party in the parliament, in the elections. And and therefore one of us is stupid. No, I'm not stupid. Perfect example. The elites understand this. The Queen of England understands that you, by supporting her, you're a sucker. They're not stupid. They understand. Again, I can repeat it, We both vote for the same guy. One of us is an idiot, okay? Because our interests are not just different, they're opposite. Anyway, that's a funny example. But yeah, I don't really understand. I cannot get into the mindset of the plebs. I don't know what the fuck they're thinking. But I generally, for whatever reason, I respect the plebs more than I respect my class. I don't respect my class at all. I think it's the worst class. Again, I can respect somebody who is evil and he says to my face that he's evil. I can respect that person more than somebody who is evil and pretends or thinks that he's good. I have absolutely no respect for my class. Absolutely none. That doesn't mean that I hate them or anything. Not at all. But I don't respect them. Us. I don't respect us. We are the Pharisees, we are the sophists, we are the commissars, the cardinals. That's my class. It's the worst class. The most hypocritical. Let's move on. Frontal limbic, I go into analysis about how the limbic system works and rationalization and other stuff. This is old stuff. Many of this stuff is probably not very well thought out. This explains this psychotechnology, the idea that you're willing to take personal damage. Yeah, this is interesting. Oh fuck, I remember this is cool. But yeah, it explains about the process of critical thinking, how critical thinking was suppressed through the church, reinforcing the suppression of doubt. Interesting. But it's irrelevant to what I'm saying right now. Anyway, this is interesting. This is Matthew. Matthew, yeah, he was pretty badass, this guy. Pretty badass. Good and evil. Yeah. Nietzsche. Oh yeah, I should say this. I probably stop the video and try to get a little bit more organized and have this thing have some more coherence. I know it has coherence, but I'm constantly thinking of those things. I don't know how to get them out there in a way that they're understandable. I mostly work in formal logic. I speculate a little bit here and there, but generally the whole mapping seems to be coherent. The way I view power, the way I view discipline and order, the way I see chaos and resilience, and all that stuff, it seems to make sense. The more I test it, the more it seems to make sense. And actually, here I talk about how when I was reading Beyond Good and Evil from Friedrich Nietzsche, I would constantly think of Tolkien and the thing that Tolkien presents as the absolute evil, the ring of power, the ring which has a will of its own and it corrupts and coerces. That's what it does. It's the exact opposite as then what Friedrich Nietzsche shows as morality, what is he pretty much glorifies in Beyond Good and Evil, he glorifies the will, the manifestation of the will, the powerful, the ones who carve a path in the world, who force. And it's the exact opposite of what the Lord of the Rings suggests, where you have Frodo, which, he's not a very masculine individual, let's say. So opposite worldview. So from Nietzsche's part, it's the perspective of the left hemisphere, which is narcissistic and wants power. And in the case of Tolkien, it's the right hemisphere. Although he doesn't, I don't know, he just opposes himself to the left hemisphere. He opposes himself to power, and he doesn't talk about economic power. He talks about power in general. That's what I try to do as well. Although economics are interesting for the guaranteed basic income part and the UBI part, but when it comes to power doesn't work like that only in one system. Power works like that in general. And I like that about the Lord of the Rings, because he doesn't go into economics at all. He shows how power works in general. And there are all kinds of ideological and religious traditions in the background from Friedrich Nietzsche and also Tolkien. We're talking about different traditions here. The one which sees the sovereignty of the individual and the greatness of the individual will and all that stuff. This is the one tradition, and the other tradition looks more into the Gestalt, how the church, the living and breathing church, is at the core of the religious experience. In the one case, it's just you and the Bible, the two of you, and the other case, it's a living community which evolves. Anyway, so there's a huge contradiction between the two perspectives, the individualistic perspective and more holistic perspective. I suspect there's something to it. Anyway, let's go to Yggdrasil. Let's go to the tree of knowledge of good and evil, because this is important, very important. I've seen many people lately talking about this myth. It's probably one of the most important myths ever written or told. Generally, these myths, most of them are extremely ancient, for probably thousands of years. For some of them, they would pass down from generation to generation orally. Mostly they would sing those myths. They would sing those myths because songs are much easier to remember. Classic case is the Homeric myths. They were sung from generation to generation. At some point, much later on, they were written. In some cases, centuries later. In some cases, maybe, who knows, maybe thousands of years later. So, in the Garden of Eden, I take this myth, the more I look into this myth, the more seriously I take it. There are many reasons. There are all kinds of symbolism that I have no fucking clue, and I see people making rationalization about what the symbol represents, what the snake represents. I'm like, fuck this shit. How do you know what it represents? Did God tell you? However, there are other stuff which are obvious, It's the tree of knowledge of good and evil. It says right on its forehead, it says the knowledge of good and evil. So it's the tree of knowledge of morality. That's pretty simple. Okay, and we're in the Garden of Eden. Again, in the Garden of Eden, it's like paradise. We live in abundance. We live with God. Again, you don't have to have any logical jumps or any weird rationalization. We're in an idyllic scenario. And once we eat from the knowledge of good and evil, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, we are thrown from this idyllic environment. So, I take this myth very seriously. This myth suggests that the moment we create morality, things start going sideways. What is morality? Weren't we moral at some point? No. The way I translate this myth is that we used to have implicit morality. We used to have the kind of morality that a pack of wolves have. So, or, you look at a pack of chimps, they have morality. They're rich interactions. They're not scumbags. They are sometimes they're not. But, there's certain rules based on which one interacts with the other. There's a richness of experience there. And this constantly recalibrates based on every single chimp in the troop has a very deep knowledge of the other chimps. They spend all the time together, they live all their lives together, they're constantly in interaction. So you have a morality which is deeply subtle and enriched and multi-layered. Okay, I'm not saying that's necessarily good. There are kind of chimps which they're assholes. That's a different thing. But there is a deep implicit thing, multi-layered thing. Whereas you move, and we were like that. We used to live our entire lives in troops of, 100 people, 200 people, something like that, in small troops, small hunter-gatherer tribes. So we knew every single person within that troop in and out, okay? There was very deep awareness of other people within the troop. So, this myth suggests to me that this changed. Okay, this is my rationalization. This is what I suspect. This stops happening when we go from an implicit morality to an explicit morality. A moral code, like the Ten Commandments, for example, or actually the book, the Bible, it's all about, moral law. So it starts with this myth. It's pretty early on, this myth, and then it goes into the issue of moral law. Similar to how, by the way, Plato starts with the myth of the cave, and then he goes on, he builds his own his own cave. Anyway, but the entire thing is about divine moral law. And this is why, the whole thing about idolatry, you shouldn't use the idolatry is central in the Bible. It's one of the core, probably the most important law. The thing that God gets most pissed off about, he constantly says you started worshipping false idols, and it's always like that. You have forsaken me and stuff like that. Why so much? What does he care about false idols so much, right? I suspect that's why. Because you see, the letter of the law is a false idol. It's a false idol. The letter of the law is a false idol. The implicit, the spirit of the law, what the letter of the law implies should be done. That's the actual morality. So, and once we lose the capacity to regulate our moral behavior through the implicit, for all kinds of practical reasons, so we start organizing at troops of, 1,000 people, 2,000 people, 10,000 people. And the way we were able to do that is exactly because we had those moral laws, right? We had explicit laws. These explicit laws allowed us to organize in huge troops, but at a cost. The cost was that we were thrown out of the Garden of Eden, and we committed, what is it called, the original sin. And that's why I suspect that this exact thing is radical evil. Identified the letter of the law with the spirit of the law, not being able to see that there is a spirit of the law in the first place. I suspect I take this myth seriously. I think this myth explains how we fucked up in the first place. Now, about the snake and I don't fucking know. I don't care. I mean, if I had very strong evidence of what the snake implies, what the apple implies, blah blah blah, whatever. I don't have. Whereas, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, it's not the tree of life, okay? The tree of life is the tree of life. We haven't eaten it yet. We probably eat it soon. Probably. Except if the world ends before we have the time to eat from it, but I suspect we're close to eating from the tree of life. When you look at Michael Levin's work, you're like, what the fuck? Frogs regenerating their legs and stuff like that. Weird. Blood magic. But yeah, I suspect we're about to eat from and that's, if when we ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, the negative side effect of that was virtue signaling and hypocrisy and narcissism and all that kind of stuff. What will happen when we eat from the tree of life? Yeah, hubris. Obviously, yeah, it has connection. The myth has connections with hubris as well. How do I explain it here? I think I give the same explanation I just gave. These are old stuff. Old stuff. Yeah, it's the same explanation. Yeah, I didn't explain this. Obvious. Once you start organizing large troops, all other smaller troops are doomed. So, as an individual, once you move from the implicit morality to the explicit morality, to the moral code, the Bushido, the Ten Commandments, the whatever the explicit law is, once you do that, you lose from the richness of the implicit morality, right? You lose from the rich coordination of society. You get much more soulless, much more formal, much more shallow coordination, right? But by using a formal code, by using formal law, formal morality, you can organize people by the hundreds, by the thousands. Once you have organizations by hundreds and thousands, even though as individuals, those hundreds and thousands as individuals are living much more miserable lives than they were when they were in the Garden of Eden, when they were immediate return hunter-gatherers. Even though their individual life is much worse, they live less, they live more miserably, blah blah blah. But as a troop, they're much more powerful than the hunter-gatherer troops. So, if for some reason these people decide to go to war and start plundering and killing and stealing from hunter-gatherers for our surrounding tribes, from whoever, they cannot be stopped. Okay? They cannot. Groups of millions, of hundreds of thousands. No hunter-gatherer troop has any chance of dealing with this kind of power. So the moment this starts happening, the moment moral law is implemented, the moment moral codes are implemented, it's like a tsunami of consequences. Suddenly, they conquer everything. The power that these moral codes provides them is insane relative to other troops which do not organize based on these moral codes, which allows thousands of people, or hundreds of thousands, millions of people in some cases, to organize, states or city states or whatever. I can speak a bit about the Dunbar's number and stuff like that. Yeah. Also, up until that point, narcissists would be pretty much either behave, at least not enact their narcissistic tendencies when we're hunter-gatherers, or be killed. If they didn't behave, they would be killed. Once you have formal law, a narcissist will find ways to navigate the formal law, or to use the formal law to his personal advantage. Again, you lose the richness of the implicit through formal law. How do I know whether somebody follows a law for personal gain, or whether oh, fuck it. The difference between the letter of the law and the spirit of the law. I don't remember what I have said and what I haven't said yet, but I'll give you an example which is extremely clear about the difference between the letter of the law and the spirit of the law. Let's say there's a law which doesn't allow you to throw garbage on the beach, right? The spirit of the law is to keep the beach clean. And somebody comes there, and the law is explicit. You shouldn't throw garbage on the beach. And somebody comes and start, I don't know, dumping huge numbers of toxic waste in the water. And he's like, I'm perfectly legal. I haven't done anything illegal. I'm a law-abiding citizen. In terms of the letter of the law, he's perfectly legal. He hasn't spoiled anything on the beach or anything like that. In terms of the spirit of the law, he obviously has done something which is 10 times worse than throwing a cigarette on the beach or anything like that. And this is, this again, the banality of evil is another example. I always want to read Hannah Arendt again. I should read her again. But, and it connects with the Puritans as well, the banality of evil. Anyway, I'll say one last thing, because my brain is a bit scrambled. I don't remember what I have said and what I haven't said. So, about the guaranteed basic income, there are two things that need to happen in order for us to have a small chance of surviving the years to come. The one thing is, again, I don't know if guaranteed basic income is the thing. I don't pretend to be God or anything like that. I do know that the goal is to change the incentive structure. As long as the incentive structure selects for narcissists and dark traits, we're fucked. It doesn't matter, even if there's a revolution and we kill all the evil people at the top who control all, and even if we redistribute wealth, whatever we do, as long as the incentive structures remain the same, we're fucked. But that's the one part. So that's what I suggest that a guaranteed basic income will do. It will open the option of having a different kind of evaluation of status, a different kind of evaluation of what is worth it and what is not worth it, what is valuable and what is not valuable, a reevaluation of life. So that's the one part. The other part, and this should be said as well, is so it's changing the gestalt, which is primary. Changing the gestalt, changing the incentive structure. But there will never be an opening to change the incentive structure as long as the people who benefit from the current incentive structure, the people who worship and love the current incentive structure, do not lose power. This will never happen. It might happen in form. You might, the classic example, the woke, they took all the ideas of Martin Luther King and the rest of them, and they turn it 180 degrees. And you have CIA advertisements and woke CIA advertisements, and you also have woke military industrial complex advertisements. So yeah, it doesn't. That's all bullshit, obviously. So as long as the process of individuation, the way in which the gestalt, the way in which they call it Moloch, Schmachtenberger and the rest of them, the way Moloch manifests itself is through an individual wills. As long as those individual wills are not constrained one way or another, as long as their power is not removed, their wealth confiscated, something like that. By the way, most of these people, they would prefer to die than have their wealth confiscated, okay? Most of them. So it's all about redistributing the wealth of those people. It's all about redistributing the wealth of the 0.1%. Doesn't matter, even if there's a bloody revolution, if their wealth remains to their families, we're fucked. Because as long as those centers of power exist, they will never allow for the incentive structure to change. Okay? So it's both the gestalt is primary, the incentive structure must change, but the incentive structure, which is the primary thing, is the important thing, is the change of the incentive structure. It will never change unless there is first a change in the ways the incentive structure expresses itself. A change in the level of individuation. If you don't get rid of the kings and queens of the current gestalt, the gestalt won't change. It might change in form, in name, but in essence it never has changed. Never. It doesn't matter if you're talking about communist Russia, it doesn't matter if you're talking about ancient Athens or ancient Rome. Never change. The same people who killed Caesar, the same people killed Kennedy, the same people killed Christ. It's the same people. Anyway, I'll think about uploading this. I don't know. It's all scrambled up. I don't know if I understand anything that I'm saying. I mean, it's completely formal in my head. It's like, but I'm not good at explaining stuff. I'll probably upload this crap. Anyway, thank you for listening. And Panagia is out. Have a good one.